shoes to build their facilities in York. Mike, former president of St. Onge Company, a York-based global renowned supply chain engineering firm, will discuss the process most companies go through when they make these large capital investments. We will also describe the various logistic advantages York has, as well as address some of the challenges facing York from a manufacturing and distribution perspective. A fellow Rotarian, Mike spent 23 years at St. Onge when he led the creation of the company's supply chain strategy practice. When Art St. Onge retired in 2005, Mike was named president of the company, a position he held for 11 years. After leaving St. Onge in early 2019, Mike ran for public office, was elected in November as a state rep. Again, congratulations. Mike will share some insights about his many years of experience providing supply chain consulting expertise to many of the world's largest and most respected corporations. Mike has led projects on 5 continents for more than 100 different retail, distribution, and manufacturing clients. Included are Alcoa, AutoZone, ExxonMobil, Hershey, Johnson & Johnson, Kraft Foods, L'Oreal, Lowell, Newell, Rubbermaid, Pepsi, Procter & Gamble's, and Exxon. Mike and his wife Julie have been married for 26 years, live in the Dallaston area, and they have 4 children. Mike?
To Tom's point on jabbering, I can't tell you how refreshing it is to actually talk about business instead of politics. I'm a little rusty here. It's been a year and a half, but it is very refreshing. Somewhat to that end, I just want to say I was a business guy for 23 years, as Tom shared, but I've never been an entrepreneur. And I know there's a lot of great entrepreneurs in this room, and I just want to tell you how much we appreciate you, how much I love business, and what a great service you do to our county, because it's people that take risk and work really hard that create wealth, that create jobs, that many of the rest of us kind of feed off of. So thanks to you. It's a group that I don't think is acknowledged nearly enough, and congratulations to the students of the month. The Berkeviles and our family go to church together. I thought they had come out to hear my speech. It turns out they were here for the student of the month. Hannah, I thought that was wonderful. I just can't help but share one thing. Focus on that word joy as opposed to happiness. Happiness is shallow and fleeting, and I don't think any of us when we're at our funeral want to hear people say he was or she was a really happy person. As we reflect back on President Bush, who is arguably the greatest living American, you look at everything that he accomplished in his life, I don't think happy makes the list. But joy certainly does, and kind, and strong, and brave, and courageous. And I think, and we'll touch on this a little bit in our presentation, we do kids a huge disservice when they hear mom and dad say, I just want you to be happy. If you want to create a really weak, shallow, likely unsuccessful individual, continue to tell them that all you want is for them to be happy, because you will seek short-term pleasure at the expense of long-term gain. So I thought that your speech, both of you, was just fantastic, and as Mike said, hard act to follow. So let's get into it here. I am here much more in my role as former president of St. Onge Company, what I happen to believe to be the greatest company in the world, and certainly a hidden gem here in York County that most people may have heard of, but probably don't know exactly what they do. We'll touch on that briefly. So a couple caveats. This is relatively dry material, but stick with it, please. We're talking about warehouses where you store stuff, so I'll try to spruce it up a little bit. If I say anything along the way that offends you, I don't mean it that way. I'm not real big on political correctness. My wife says I need a half-second pause between my brain and my mouth, but I haven't quite mastered that yet. I don't think this one will be too terribly controversial, though. But I do have a little food for thought at the end that I do ask that you all kind of digest and ponder a bit. This is geared toward larger companies and facilities, which is mainly what I spent my career working with. There are a lot of reasons you might build a relatively modest warehouse anywhere in the country. But we're talking about a lot of these large boxes that you're seeing going up along 83, along the 81-78 corridor, which, by the way, is up to about 385 million square feet of distribution space if you take all of 81 and 83 and 78. To put that in perspective, that is about the total amount of distribution space in all of Mexico. Okay, they're give or take a few hundred, or a couple hundred, or 8 or 10 million, they're about the same. Chicago, about 1 billion square feet. Southern California, almost 2 billion. But York is, the general South Central Pennsylvania is one of the hottest markets in the country for warehousing. This is a very high level kind of presentation, directionally sound. There are a lot of things that are company specific. So when we go through this presentation, you know, I'm not a rocket scientist, but I hope you don't leave here thinking, I can't believe this guy made a living doing this for 20 years. There are a few more complexities, probably 50% of which is getting people to align. When I say York, we're really talking about South Central Pennsylvania. I mentioned it later in the presentation, but Kevin Schreiber talked a while back. I think it's very, very wise that we do what the folks at York County Economic Alliance are doing, and really think of this area as York, Harrisburg, and Lancaster. We are much, much stronger together when we have some scale than we are competing with each other. One of us wins, I think we all win. Obviously, we all know plenty of people that live in York and work in Lancaster and vice versa. I do just want to say, York is very well positioned, as we'll talk about, but we are not unique. The reason I share that, there's plenty of other cities, Allentown, Columbus, Indianapolis, to name a few, that we compete with directly or indirectly, that also have strong stories. Ours is well above average, but the reason I share that is we still need to compete at the local and what I call the tactical level. It's not just that our location is so unique that people are, you know, that they're just dying to be here. We still need to look at a lot of other factors. So what we're going to talk about, only 3 items on our agenda. I want to talk a little bit about supply chain strategy and optimization. How do large companies generally arrive at these decisions in the first place? And I'm going to give you the world's fastest demonstration of a supply chain network model that you probably will ever see. I'm going to talk about York County's advantages, and then really want to spend a little time about our future and some of the challenges as well as potential opportunities that we face on not only distribution, but manufacturing in particular, which, as you know, is deep in our heritage, and it is critical that we maintain and grow that, because that's really one of the few sectors that does truly create wealth and provides really great sustaining type jobs. So when companies are looking at these decisions, I boil it down to about 4 things. Demand: where are your customers located? What are they ordering? How much are they ordering? How are they ordering it? Is it coming via FedEx plane? Is it coming via tractor trailer or railroad or whatnot? The cost, we'll talk about that in a second. That's mainly going to be transportation cost, inbound cost, transfers between facilities, outbound cost, that sort of thing. It's going to be labor cost, fixed and variable cost. Anytime you open a facility, you're going to have a certain minimum amount of labor. You're going to have a certain minimum amount of overhead. So those are fixed and then variable as you scale up from there. So that's generally your labor cost, your building cost, and to some extent your inventory carrying cost. Constraints are things such as I can't put 100 million pounds of product through a facility that's only designed to handle 50 million. So there are things called capacity on buildings. Sometimes they're landlocked and cannot be addressed. Sometimes the building can be expanded, and that's something we look at. There are other constraints. I can't put refrigerated material in an ambient facility. Chocolate, for example, is one of the trickiest products to store. If you get it too hot, it melts. If you get it too cold, it turns white. There's a whole bunch of issues there. So you got to look at the different requirements for the product. And then there's a lot of intangibles, which is generally where we capture company politics and personality and that sort of thing. So how do they go about doing this? Generally speaking, most companies, large companies in the world, will go through what's called some network optimization exercise, usually a 3 to 4 month type study. And believe it or not, there is no one in the world that does a better job of that than the folks at St. Onge Company. There's also nobody in the world that has as good or deep a resume as St. Onge on designing warehouses and distribution facilities, and they do great work on manufacturing as well. So it's a niche provider, but extremely well and well-known and large in that niche. It's just that, you know, 95% of the work is done outside of York, so a lot of folks haven't heard of St. Onge. So again, we're looking at the manufacturing, distribution. You're looking at all these costs simultaneously, and you have to honor all of these constraints. The mathematics get too complicated too quickly. It's not the type of exercise you can do with a spreadsheet or a database. No matter how smart you may be, you could spend the rest of your life figuring out what, with the right software tools, can be done in a matter of minutes. And we're going to show you a quick example of that. So typically we use specialized software. This is not like Microsoft or Oracle. These are niche analytical tools called network optimization software, often led by a strategic consultant. That's what yours truly did for 20 years. Actually, what I did is I hired 3 really good people and hopped on their shoulders and wrote it for all it was worth. That's another life lesson, Hannah. Hire people, and Harrison, hire people that are smarter than you. Surround yourself with really, really good people. Just like our campaign, I have 2 awesome people right here, Paige and Laura. So that makes life a lot easier when you surround yourself with good people. But it's a specialty niche kind of thing. A lot of companies don't want to hire somebody just to do this, so you'd be surprised. Believe it or not, St. Onge, for example, did these studies. You heard some of the clients with Kraft Balt Nabisco many years ago and was looking at integrating their food business into Nabisco. You're talking at that point a room with 30 people in the room, probably 20 of whom shouldn't have even been there, a couple of senior vice presidents from each organization. It was St. Onge Company, even way back in 2000, that was doing that strategy to say which facilities stay and which go. And probably did 50 projects for Kraft when I was there and a bunch for Procter & Gamble. So it's pretty neat stuff. In any event, this is meant to be a little bit tricky because this is sort of showing you why you need some specialized tools. So what you're trying to do is look at all of these costs and constraints simultaneously. So what we're showing here is the fewer facilities I have, as I go from few facilities to more, almost every cost goes up, almost, okay? My inventory will go up, all things being equal. My fixed cost will go up. It doesn't go up linearly, it goes up as a stair steps. In other words, I either expand a building or I don't, I build a building or I don't, so it tends to go up in increments. Not, you know, at some point you reach that capacity where it breaks and you got to have a little bit more. Labor increases because there's inefficiencies across more buildings. The transfer of product between back and forth. You never get your inventory balanced, so you move it back and forth. So why would you have a lot of facilities? Well, mainly so you can have service and be close to your customer, and your outbound freight, which is your biggest spend, typically will come down. What you're looking for is the sweet spot. When you look at total cost, there's usually a range of optimal locations and number of facilities, okay? That's where, once a company gets to that point, then they get into a detailed site selection process, and that's where we have to compete, as I mentioned, on that local and kind of tactical level. At a strategic level, they're not going to know the difference between Harrisburg versus York versus Lancaster. We're actually going to be competing with the Martinsburg, West Virginias, with the Hagerstown, Marylands, maybe even down into Winchester, certainly up into Allentown. Because at that point, the little bit of movement you're going to see in transportation cost is going to be trumped by, well, what facilities do you have available? How quickly can we get in here? How easy are you to do business with? How much labor do you have, which we're going to talk about in a second. Those types of things. How's the regulatory climate? That's what's going to drive. Those are going to have a much bigger impact versus that last 40 or 50 miles one way or the other. We did all of Lowe's studies. Every Lowe's distribution center almost that was ever built was because that's where we suggested they build it. One time, Denver, Colorado was the recommendation. They ended up in Cheyenne, Wyoming because Cheyenne rolled out the red carpet for them. Some intangibles, we won't get into a whole lot of weeds here, but there are a lot of things that the numbers don't tell. What's your risk tolerance? How much disruption to the business? You can't have the surgery kill the patient, so to speak. So, you know, theoretical optimal might be to close 7 facilities and open 5. Well, that's a whole lot of risk involved. If I can get 90% of the bang for 20% of the buck in the risk. So rarely is the theoretical optimal answer the best answer. The best answer is how do I get 80% of the benefit for 20% of the cost and the risk. And that's sort of what we say here at the bottom. Don't let better be the victim of best. Very quickly, this is how a model works. I want to draw your attention. This is very, very simple. This was like an office products delivery company. If the cost of each warehouse is $250,000, we're just going to change that one variable and see how the map changes. Okay, so there's transportation cost outbound only and the cost of the buildings. So the more the cost goes up of a building, the fewer I'm going to have, right? If it cost me $1 trillion for a building, I would most likely have one. If they were free, I'd have them on every street corner. At $250,000, we have a lot of them. But even at $250,000, you'll see that Los Angeles is serving Las Vegas. Does that make sense? What that tells me is if I put a building in Las Vegas that cost me $250,000, I would not save $250,000 in transportation. Might be $249.99, might be $50. I don't know from this what it is, but I know it's not worth $250,000. Does that make sense what's going on? Also, if you look at this map, you would think Cleveland is a bad location. We have Detroit, Columbus, and Pittsburgh show up. Okay, keep your eye on Cleveland. When it goes to 500, when it goes to $1 million, this is the variable. Now Cleveland shows up, and it's just the opposite. It services Detroit, Columbus, and Pittsburgh. Does that make sense? Believe it or not, as simple as this would take months to probably do in a spreadsheet with all the different variables and cities that are in here. This can be done in minutes. Okay? You keep going, we're going to speed it up here. The number of facilities keeps going down. If you keep your eye on Chicago, anybody that's geographically challenged, that's sitting right there. Buddy of mine asked his daughter, who was an AB student about ready to graduate high school, we were down at the beach for a soccer tournament, he said, if you go across the ocean, what will you run into? There's a lot of acceptable answers. I don't know the exact answer. She said California. That's funny, but it's also a miserable commentary and a miserable failure on our education system, that we learn a whole bunch of useless facts and don't know that California is not on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. In any event, so we get here and we go from $2 million and we go to 3, and what changes? 2 million to 3 million, nothing changed. You notice that? Well, why is that? Well, there's at least 5 possibilities. There's actually a few more. One is there wasn't enough transportation cost savings. Okay, maybe if that next warehouse cost 2.9 million, it might have, or if it went to 3.1, I'm sorry, it might have gotten rid of 1. You might also have a constraint. If you're out of capacity, you're out of capacity, right? It doesn't matter. I might need that many warehouses to service the volume. Service constraint. If I told the model I want to be within a day or so of most every customer, I can't close many more, I won't be able to reach them. Does that make sense? Minimum number. I might have said I don't want less than 7 or 8 because of what? Because of that risk tolerance thing. If I put everything in one building and I save a whole bunch of money, that's really good, right? If that building burns down, that's not so good. So a lot of people don't want more. We did a study in Japan one time for Alcon. They justified a second warehouse mainly on earthquake damage or risk, because they could not have all their eggs in one basket. Might have told them that we have to have buildings in these key markets. That happens a lot. You can go wherever you want to go, but we're going to service Chicago, okay, or New York. So there's a lot of factors. That's the process. Why does York County fare well? Well, location is the big one. See, that's why it's in big bold letters. You follow what I did there? Also, our land availability is relatively good. We are blessed. If we were St. Louis or Indianapolis or Columbus, we would be surrounded by all types of viable competition. Okay, not only is our location generally good, but we've got a lot of folks that aren't so competitive, especially, they're more business friendly, sadly, in some regards. But you look at land and that sort of thing and labor cost, well, what's your alternative? New Jersey, Maryland, even in Allentown that's getting up there in that New York City bedroom community. So we look at that. So we're pretty good overall on cost and availability. It's all relative. Infrastructure, okay? Pittsburgh's a pretty good location based on what it's close to, but it's nowhere near a port, is it? So, and it doesn't even have that, highways aren't that great. We have great north, south, east, west interstates. We are close to 3 of the 7 or 8 biggest. New York, New Jersey is the 3rd biggest, Virginia is the 7th, and Baltimore is like 10th or 12th. So we're near 3 of the largest ports, and our weather is actually relatively good. You get a significant difference, especially if you head a little more north or west, so like a Pittsburgh or something. And we did a study in St. Louis years ago. Believe it or not, St. Louis's weather versus Chicago is significantly better, and that's not trivial when you're trying to get product out in the wintertime. Here's the one everybody kind of thinks of, which is valid. These are 100-mile radiuses, radii. We're not real close to a whole lot, but we're darn close to a lot of other stuff. So we're up within 500 miles, which is about how far you can go with a truck in one day, give or take. We are up to 30% of the nation's population. But also note, as this next map shows, it's not just how many people you're close to, but who you're close to. These are dense markets that have a lot of volume. There's some companies that are going to sell disproportionate volumes to the New Yorks and the Bostons and the Baltimores that aren't going to sell out in western Iowa and Nebraska. On top of that, the GDP that these markets represent, their spending power is disproportionately high. So it's not just total people. We are near 4 of the top 10, actually 4 of the top 9 markets based on GDP, and then Baltimore is probably 12th or 15th or something like that. So that's Boston, New York, Washington, D.C., which has way more money than it should, and Philadelphia. So this is a comparison on York versus, I just picked a few cities. Memphis is a famous distribution location, okay? Is it because of how many people they're close to? They only get 18% of the population, we get 30. Does anybody know why FedEx? Oh, I just gave out the answer, sorry. That's why Memphis is so popular, FedEx. So you look at this, and you say, well, Columbus is pretty darn good, but 400 miles, which some companies would use, they drop off significantly. Pittsburgh, when you look at 200, they're not near much of anything. We're near 3 times more than they are, and that's significant because that's how far you can go out and back with a truck in the same day. If you want the truck to go out and do deliveries and come back, we fare much better than Pittsburgh. They do well overall, but then you look at the infrastructure and so forth, as I mentioned. Okay, Memphis has a huge labor problem traditionally, but they do have air freight. We did a study years ago for a medical devices company. It was 3 different divisions trying to play nicely together as one. The one division said, we're very open-minded, we will do whatever you want to do. They sold heart stents that sold for about a couple $100 a throw, some of them a couple thousand a throw, and they only weigh about a few ounces. And they said, we'll go wherever you want, we just need midnight cutoff for our orders. So what they were really saying is, you guys can do whatever you want to do for the next 3 or 4 months, but we're staying in Memphis because that's the only place in the country that will give us midnight cutoff for a FedEx delivery. And they were kind of right, because you don't want to lose a sale of a $200 or $300 item that weighs 3 or 4 ounces. If I'm shipping diamond rings, that's a lot different than shipping cereal and everything in between. So that factors in a lot. Some businesses, transportation cost is huge, others it's a rounding error. What I want to show you here very quickly, flexibility. I mentioned that earlier, okay, risk mitigation. It's not just where the best single facility is, but how does it play in other networks? So these are the optimal 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 distribution center networks. Does that make sense? Okay, York doesn't appear in any of them. However, if you force York into the solution, so we tell the model, that's really great, but we want a facility in York, okay, then how does it compare? Not so well on a single site, which isn't surprising, we're a little too far east. Indianapolis does real well because it's in the middle, but we'll touch on that in a minute. Here we're within 9% of optimal on a 2-facility network. 3, 4, and 5, we are darn near optimal. Do you see that? So what that says is, if I open a 2nd facility, maybe I'm not optimal, but if I know I've got a 3rd one planned for growth down the road, and a 4th one and a 5th one, York will work very well in almost any network. Almost no matter what I do, York is going to be at least a good, potentially a very good choice. On top of that, this is based on mileage. Indianapolis has higher freight rates because going west to east is higher than east to west, because they make more stuff than they consume in the Midwest. We consume more than we make, so actually this doesn't tell the whole story. York's more competitive than it appears. And when you look at the 2 DC network, anybody been to Charleston, West Virginia lately? Do you think the infrastructure in Charleston is nearly as good as it is in York? Not nearly. Okay, nobody, I don't remember anybody in 20 years building a facility in Charleston, West Virginia. Okay, so it's not just the big picture mileage and proximity. Again, it's infrastructure and who you're close to. Lastly, a couple things here. Our biggest challenge by far is labor. I do think we have to have some discussions on job quality. I love distribution, made a living kind of doing it, but the jobs are not as good as they are with manufacturing. Overbuilding and congestion eventually becomes a problem, and business climate, putting a little bit of a political hat on here, but still I think something most all of us can agree on. Our corporate tax rate of 9.9% is ridiculous. Property tax is hurting us on a variety of fronts. The ongoing pension burden, excessive regulation, very litigious state. We just sue the heck out of good companies. It just amazes me. We literally shoot ourselves right in the foot. Same thing with the regulation. We have 72 municipalities in York alone. Somebody comes in here and says, are you kidding me? I've got 72 different interpretations of code. You could say, well, maybe it's not a big deal, maybe it is. They'll just go somewhere else. They don't. Companies do things very last minute. They have no time to deal with 72 different municipalities, only 4 of whom adhere to a standard code. It's just silly. Very quickly, labor is the big thing I want to preach on in closing. 54% of our jobs require middle skills. 50% of new jobs will require middle skills. That's more than high school and less than college. Kids, education is important, but it is highly overrated, okay? You ever heard of a guy named Bob Kinsley? You ever heard of Art Gladfelder, two of the greatest, most generous people, okay? Guess what? Neither one of them went to college, okay? There's a whole list of people that didn't go to college. I'm all for college, but it's overrated, and it's becoming a poor investment. I went to college, nothing wrong with it. A lot of people should go, but we're doing a lot of our kids a disservice. However, only 43% of our labor has middle skills. That's a 24% shortfall. We need welders and electricians and truck drivers and mechanics and nurse and and medical professionals. Nursing is a college degree, and we need them desperately. Okay. I emphasize this everywhere I go. Please don't, if you take nothing else away, we have 10,000 baby boomers every day retiring in this country. Think about the medical needs they're going to have. Think about that skill and that work ethic leaving the workforce. You cannot preach that enough. Almost 44.5% of our workforce is over 45, 30% is over 55. Pennsylvania is the 6th highest in age and growing, over 65. Our workforce population is going to start shrinking in 15. It's going to keep shrinking if something doesn't change till 2044. Who do you think is going to keep working to support all the people that retired? Okay? I hate to say it, and my brother's a teacher. I love teachers. I'm not picking on anybody. There's a whole bunch of examples, probably myself included at some point. But you can't pay people starting at 57 years old, 85% of their salary to not work. It breaks at some point. It works when you live to be 61. It doesn't work when you live to be 90. Okay? This is just reality. Okay? The entitlement mindset and family breakdown is coming home to roost. Simple example, a lot of people that counted on adult children to provide health care are now going to have to pay for that health care, and there's going to be more of them than ever in 10 or 15 years that need that health care. Where do you think the people are going to come from, okay, to take care of these folks when they maybe only had 2 kids instead of 6, when the kids live in California, not on the farm in Pennsylvania, and when, sad to say, a couple of them haven't even talked to mom or dad in 30 years. Okay, it's a big, big, big deal. We have a serious demographic issue. The oldest baby boomer is 54. Okay, when that number moves to 65-ish, give or take, that's about 10 years, we got serious issues, okay? Serious, and they're already happening. Some of the guys here, some of the guys in construction, you having trouble finding people, I'm sure. You hear it everywhere you go, right? All right, Mr. Krebs, thank you. 45% of those entering college, 45% have no degree in 6 years. None. Okay, 45% of the kids that we're telling you should go to college 6 years later have nothing to show for it, okay, but debt, okay? And then there's a whole other percentage, I don't know what it is, that have a degree that they will not work in. Here's a novel idea. How about before a kid goes to college, we at least have the courtesy to tell them, here's the average starting salary when you get out, and here's your chance of finding a job. Because, oh, by the way, if you go be a welder, okay, your chance of getting a job is 99.99%, and you're going to start at about $65,000 a year. On average, a college graduate will be 55 years old before they catch a trade school graduate in lifetime earnings when you factor in debt. Okay, so please get off this college for everyone, and it's a great investment kick because it is not true. Okay, it's true for some, engineering and a whole variety of other fields. It's not true for others. Am I mistaken? And we're doing it to ourselves. Last slide. We're going to have to embrace automation. If you heard John McElligott talk, he's dead on conceptually. There just aren't enough people to do all of the menial jobs and even some less than menial jobs. That's not a bad thing. We embrace our manufacturing tradition. We get on the front lines and we become the Silicon Valley of the East Coast. That's a good opportunity. It's reality. We celebrate trade skills and encourage middle school and high school students. When they're in kindergarten, not just, it is great to be a doctor and a lawyer and a police officer. Please don't misunderstand. But please tell them it's also really great that you want to be a carpenter, that you want to that you want to be able to be an expert in building things. Okay, we can start that early. I'm a school board member at the high school in Dallastown. They have a Pathways program. It's outstanding, where we're starting to get kids exposed to all of these different trades. A question for you. Why are we spending $1.3 billion a year in Pennsylvania in taxpayer dollars to subsidize state universities that fail to provide the skills we need? About a third of them should go out of business. That's what should happen. Simplify permitting and standardizing the codes. Think regionally, which we're doing. Kudos there to YCA. Leverage, the last thing, we're not leveraging our proximity to Washington, D.C. and our leverage as a swing state. I'm going to talk to our congressman at the U.S. level. There are great six-figure white-collar jobs that we don't talk about either, sitting around the Beltway in D.C. in high-congested, high-dollar areas. Come on up the road 50 miles, telecommute, drive down there 1 or 2 days a week, come to York, and bring in some nice office buildings and some high-dollar jobs as well. I've not heard anybody talking about that. We're very, very well positioned to leverage that D.C. Beltway bandit consultants and contractors. Last one, we need to treat the workforce issue as the crisis it is. I think mentoring programs, these baby boomers, a lot of whom are sitting around looking for something to do with themselves. We got to connect them with these young men and women who don't have that parental figure, who are looking for somebody to teach them how to make something with their hands, to take them fishing, to do any number of things. It's a huge opportunity. We got to figure out a way to make that happen. And lastly, we have to embrace and celebrate work. My kid's 16 years old, my youngest. I toured a factory the other day. Great man. He's sending jobs to Mexico that he wants to keep here because people will not do the work. Let's get high schoolers out there and 17, 18 years old and get them in where they're making money, putting money in their pocket, having a sense of pride, and then they'll start to see, then they can really make a decision, get their foot in the water with some certification type programs, and then make a college decision, or better yet, let your employer make that investment and pay it for you once you really know what it is you want to do. That's all I got. Sorry.